everybody, welcome tonight. It's great to see so many people joining. Why don't you, while we're waiting, we'll get started in about 3 minutes. If you want to share in the chat, like where you're zooming in from, we'd love to know. Oh, Colorado, fantastic. Hi, Deanna. Hi, Talia. Hi, Roberta. Oh, everybody's coming in fast and furious. It's fantastic. Oh, Huntsville, Texas, great. Swansea, Illinois. Chicago, Illinois, great. Oh, also San Diego, wonderful. Brantford, Connecticut, welcome. Philadelphia, the San Chiricos, lovely. We're from San Diego, that's wonderful. Oh, Melbourne, Australia. I think you might be our furthest participant tonight. Welcome indeed. San Diego again, wonderful. Colorado. Ooh, Washington, D.C. Anyway, we'll be getting started in about a minute. So welcome everybody. Oh, someone from Seattle. Lovely. So the West Coast and Middle America, the Midwest and the East Coast are all well represented. I saw someone from Texas, which means the South is here. Great. It's wonderful to see how many people are interested in this subject. Great, someone's sharing a video. Okay. Oh yeah, you want to tell everybody what that's about before they click on it? Oh, there's Valerie Karras. How lovely. It's wonderful to have you here. I gather you're Valerie, that you're dialing in from St. Louis, probably. Oh, Kansas. All right. Well, listen, folks, it's about time to begin. I think we might as well get started. We have a wonderful audience already. So let's begin. So my name is Patricia Van Bouteneff, and I am the president of Oxia Women, a network by, for, and about Orthodox women in the service of Christ. And I am delighted that we are co-hosting this event with St. Phoebe, because 4 years ago, not long after Oxia came into being, St. Phoebe Center for the Deaconess was the first to offer the hand of friendship and agree to be a partner of ours. Even more delighted at the range of speakers this evening, some of whom may be known to you and others not. One of them happens to be my daughter. So let me now hand things over to the head of St. Phoebe, Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost, who will actually be giving a webinar on Oxia's platform on July 30th, based on her outstanding and very recent book, Church of Our Granddaughters. It's all yours.
Thank you, Pat. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's event on Girls and Women's Liturgical Service. I am Carrie Frederick Frost, and I'm the chair of St. Phoebe Center. And this event is part of a series of events celebrating St. Phoebe Center's 10th year anniversary as an organization. And we especially thank our friends and co-sponsors at Oxia Women. Let us begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Most Holy Phoebe, who was found worthy of the diaconate, who was Paul's helper and carried his words to the people of Rome, who is called the Lamp of Centuria, we now humbly ask that you intercede for us and pray to Christ our God as we discern his will for revival of the ordained female diaconate for the upbuilding of the entire church today. Pray that we will be blessed and fruitful in our works this day and always to God's glory. Amen. Amen. Now let me tell you a little bit about the St. Phoebe Center. In 2013, the St. Phoebe Center for the Deaconess was born out of a conversation at a coffee shop about the hope for deaconesses in the Orthodox Church. Our mission is to educate and prayerfully advocate for the revival of the ordained female diaconate to help serve the ministerial needs of the Orthodox Church and the world today. In our first decade, we lifted up the history of deaconesses and the need for the restoration of this ordained order. Now in our second decade, we will build on this foundation and turn our attention to how the Orthodox Church can restore deaconesses. We're celebrating our anniversary year by offering a series of public events, including this one. And information about all of these events can be found on our website, orthodoxdeaconesses.org. Just a couple coming events. One in July on the 19th, we have an event on the myth busting, addressing myths around ordaining deaconesses. And then in September 3rd, we have an event around my book, Church of Our Granddaughters, to discuss the book and hear from me about it. And then finally, at the end of this year in November, we will have an in-person symposium on the theme of deaconesses for the Orthodox Church today. It will be held November 10th through 12th at Holy Cross Hellenic College in Boston, Massachusetts. Registration is available on our website, and we would love to see many of you there. Finally, we invite you to please join St. Phoebe Center's work in other ways. You could join us as a supporter. You could add your name to the growing list of names of people who support deaconesses and the church today. You could join our network, join the growing number of people who want to volunteer with the St. Phoebe Center, pitch in and help one way or another. You could join us as a donor. We are a US nonprofit and we need your financial support to do our work. All this can happen on our website, orthodoxdeaconesses.org. Now to tonight's event, I will introduce this evening's moderator. My fellow board member, Dr. Teva Regule, received her MDiv from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology and her PhD in systematic theology from Boston College. Her doctoral work was focused on liturgical theology and history. Over the years, she has been an invited Orthodox participant to various consultations sponsored by the World Council of Churches, primarily focusing on ecclesiology. Dr. Regule has taught at her alma mater, as well as at the Papas Patristic Institute. In addition to being a board member of the St. Phoebe Center, Dr. Regule serves as the president of the Orthodox Theological Society in America. Dr. Regule, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. So our theme tonight is one of the most important, or deals with one of the most important pastoral issues of our day, and one that tends to be unevenly practiced and sometimes heavily debated: girls' and women's liturgical service. Before I begin, I would like to review some of the format and the logistics for our online seminar. Our program format is as follows. After my introductory comments, I will introduce our first panelist, and after remarks by the speakers in our first section of the program, we will take questions relative to their remarks. After which, I will introduce our next set of panelists, and this will be followed by questions relative to their remarks. We will then open the floor for further questions and discussion. You can use the chat function to submit your written questions, or quote unquote, raise your hand in the reactions button to submit your question. We will then unmute you so that you may speak to the group. Please state your name and location when asking a question. Now, I would like to note that the St. Phoebe Center seeks to promote respectful and reasonable discussion about, again, ordaining women to the diaconate in the Orthodox Church, as well as girls and women's service more generally. We expect that all participants, both panelists and attendees, will treat each other with the highest regard, acknowledging that we are all children of God. We ask that if a specific example of an incident in the life of the church is offered, that any identifying remarks of people involved, or if it is a personal story, any others involved, be withheld so that we may discuss these issues generally and with respect for privacy. Finally, we encourage your curious, robust, and respectful engagement with the work of the St. Phoebe Center. So this is a Zoom meeting, which means that we can all see one another. And we hope that this will facilitate a robust dialogue. However, if you do not wish to be seen, you can turn off your camera, and we will be spotlighting the speakers during their respective presentations. In case of technical difficulties on this end, we suggest that you set your screen for speaker view in order to focus on the particular presentation. You can do this by toggling the setting in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We also have opened the chat for dialogue. Note that the seminar is being recorded, and once edited, we plan to post it on our website. Now I'd like to introduce our event. Last June, Axia sponsored an online seminar integrating girls and boys in liturgy at which I spoke about liturgy and the need for participation in its celebration. I focused on two specific ways of participating in liturgy in particular, that of tantric readers and chanters, and the second as altar servers or congregational servers. And tonight's seminar is a follow-on to that event. For those of you who are unable to be with us, I will briefly review a few of the slides, and after which we will hear from the women who have or are currently participating in these capacities and who will share their experience with us. So if you'll bear with me. So these were the screens from our last presentation. These were the slides, integrating girls and boys in liturgy. I talked about liturgy in particular as something that we are all called to participate in, that we are all called to use our gifts. And I won't go over everything I gave in that initial presentation, but I did want to kind of set the stage, for this is an area and this is a question of participation. It's not a question of equal rights or any of the other things that sometimes we might assume, but it's of what we are called to do, participate in the liturgy. The liturgy is the communal body work of the body of Christ, in which we are all called to participate. In liturgy in particular, because it is the way that we as Orthodox express, experience, understand, and transmit our faith. It speaks to our identity, it forms us as Christians, and gives us the power for transformation. Of course, in order to do that, we have to actively participate in it. And this is actually a quote from Bishop Nazarius of Nizhny Novgorod in the turn of this 20th century, which he states just this. Our participation in liturgy comes in many forms. We are all called to pray the prayers, to sing the responses, exchange the kiss of peace, receive the Eucharist, etc. And we all have our part to play. In this particular webinar, I focused on readers and chanters and altar servers, and in particular, how we can include girls in their exercise. The first one we will speak on tonight is the reader or chanter. A little bit about what they do. They read the texts, talking about and learning about God, Jesus' teaching ministry, the saints' tradition. They engage the text more deeply. The Christian story becomes theirs. They're not just hearers, but proclaimers of the word. And they just, in fact, if gifted to sing, they learn how to chant in a tone with nuance and meaning. This is not something, a call for women to be formally tantric in this regard is actually not something that is new in the church. As early as 1918, the bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church allowed for women readers. And in 1976, Metropolitan Emilianos Timiadis at the Agapia consultation formally called for them to be admitted into the minor orders as readers and acolytes. This was something that was taken up again in 1988 at the Rhodes consultation and the possibility of opening up these particular ministries to women. Soon after that, Metropolitan Philip Saliba of the Antiochian Archdiocese did in fact tonsure some women readers and chanters. And we have one of them here with us tonight, who I would now like to introduce. Dr. Susan Ashbrook Harvey is professor of religious studies at Brown University, where she teaches in the history of Christianity, including its Orthodox traditions. She's a longtime member of St. Mary's Antiochian Orthodox Church in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where she serves as a tantra chanter and also as a choir director. She is past president of the Orthodox Theological Society in America and serves as a steering committee for women in the church and in the International Orthodox Theological Association. And for 25 years, she also served on the North American Bilateral Eastern Orthodox Roman Catholic Consultation. And it was a great pleasure that I welcome Susan to our forum, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Teva, and thank you, Pat, and thank you, Carrie. I'm very grateful to St. Phoebe's and to Oxia for creating this kind of space for people in our church and for inviting me to be part of this evening's event. I'm deeply honored to be part of it. And gratified and strengthened greatly by the work of this communities. So I started reading and helping with chanting in the early 1980s when I was converting to Orthodoxy, first in Rochester, New York, and then starting in 1988 when we moved to Rhode Island. And I began, like many people, I began to help myself follow the services better. I was a convert to Orthodoxy, and there were so many words, so many unfamiliar words, and reading helped me stay focused. Reading helped me follow the services more closely. And the other thing was that with something of the zeal of a recent convert, I attended most all the services that were offered in my parish. I didn't have a child yet. And for Vespers and Matins, as you all will be familiar with, there were often only one or two people there. So actually, the help was needed. And I think, like many people, I began to chant simply to help. First reading and then chanting. And in 1989, in response to the Rhodes consultation that Teva was just referring to, I was tonsured by Metropolitan Philip, along with 3 others in my parish, 2 men, 2 women. And we were a close team for a number of years there, so that it was a context in which reading together, chanting together, singing in the choir together, which we all did, and reading the epistle, this group of us, small group of us. It was a context in which love for the services could really grow amongst us. And I think for myself, that's something that has lasted in a very deep way. It was a short step from the chanter stand to the choir loft and to also reading the epistle. I was never properly trained for any of this. There was less help available in the years when I was beginning than there is now. I'm constantly grateful for the kinds of materials that have been published and are available online, but there wasn't very much of that when I was learning. I have apprenticed myself over the years to many people who know more than me whenever I'm able to chant with someone. Whenever we had someone in our parish who was experienced, I did whatever I could to apprentice myself. I used CDs, I used cassette tapes. As music became available in Western notation, I would collect vast quantities of it. Once we got a piano, I worked on that. People like Teva helped me. And I would say that there's a kind of competence that comes not from talent or skill, but sheer practice. So I have gained that kind of competence over the years. About 6 years ago, I also had to take over as choir director. And again, I think like many people, not because I have any training or skill to bring to that, but because there wasn't someone else to do it. But again, practice is not the same thing as training, but it can yield a certain competency and people can respond to that. So I will say that my time as choir director, although I constantly find it really stretching me to levels I just often don't feel I have the strength to fill, it's been incredibly rewarding because the choir itself is such a wonderful community to sing with, to work with, to be with. And the congregation has been very responsive to us. So that moves me to my next point, which is that functional significance for this kind of work is huge. That is, it simply matters that when someone is able to read well, when someone is willing to learn how to chant, however basically, I only do basic things, when someone wants to help with that kind of work, it matters for the whole parish. There was a time some years ago, I'm going back 15 or 20 years. I've been in my parish about 36 years. There was a time when I was nearly crowded out of the chanter stand. We had a whole lot of young men that were in the chanter stand. It was a difficult time in the parish. And I was the only woman left in the chanter stand. And I nearly left. And I simply could not bear to cede to a liturgy that consisted of only male voices. I could not go in a church, not a monastery, not a reading group, not a study collection, but a church, and only hear men's voices coming from the front. So I decided I needed to stay at the chanter stand, even if I was pushed way to the end of it, which I was. And in due course, there was a time when I was the only person in the chanter stand for a couple of years. So, I mean, these things, there are seasons and there are times. One thing that I would say is that chanting has certainly helped me to understand liturgy better, to love it more deeply, and even when I'm utterly frustrated with how inaccessible liturgy is to those attending it, just participating in it makes it a richer experience. And I think that my participation has helped to demystify certain aspects of liturgy for the larger parish. I think that simply because I am willing to try and I do my best, it helps people to realize that they too can gain competency in the basic skills of liturgy, and the responsibilities for a well-served liturgy can be shared out. Many voices can participate well and meaningfully and knowledgeably, and even with practical knowledge, even if you haven't trained in some official way. And this, I like to think, helps to diffuse excessive spotlight on clergy of any rank. Liturgy is a mosaic of liturgical services and a mosaic of liturgical, we all have authority, whether as lay people, as ordained, as in some way blessed or consecrated. We all have authority in the context of liturgy. These are not rival authorities. These are not competing authorities. They're complementary. We build a mosaic, and that's what we offer to God. So my final point is that without question, I think that a congregation becomes accustomed to what they see and what they hear. If they hear women's voices as an ordinary part of the service, reading, chanting, singing, even unconsciously, they come to expect and appreciate that. And this leads to increasing interest in and love for the liturgy. If you feel like you're being invited, if you feel like you're welcome as a participant, people step up because they respond to that kind of welcoming feeling. I myself try to cultivate this sense in our parish. When someone who hasn't read a prayer or the epistle before and then does so in a service, if they do it well, if they do it thoughtfully, if they do it carefully, I always compliment that person, and I make a point of complimenting that person to other people. Like when we're at coffee hour, I'll say, "Didn't so and so read well today? Didn't you think it was great to hear their voice? We haven't heard it before." And I do that to try to encourage more people who have not read previously to do so. I do it also to encourage that person to read again or to begin chanting. We have a new chanter who's beginning to learn the matins, and every week I tell him what a great job he's doing and how heroic he is, and it's true, he is. And I think that it's important to sound our appreciation for each other's voices out loud to other people as well as to each other, so that we can encourage ownership and responsibility and appreciation for the liturgy as service that we all offer unto God, and it's something we need to do together. So those are my comments. I hope that's helpful, and I thank you for listening. Again, I thank you for being invited.
Thank you very much, Susan, for your well-informed comments and comments that really come out of your many, many years of experience. And now I'd like to segue to introduce our next speaker, reader, who is both a tonsured chanter and reader, someone at a newer voice in this. Ms. Sophia Kyrou graduated from Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut in 2021 with degrees in political science and human rights. She works in management consulting as a geoeconomic associate for Longview Global Advisors and lives in Massachusetts. She was a tonsured, a chanter and reader by His Eminence Metropolitan Methodius of Boston in 2017 while studying Byzantine chant under Father Romanos Karanos. Sophia.
Thank you, first of all, Teva, for the introduction. Thank you, Patricia and Carrie, also. And thank you, St. Phoebe's and Axia Women, for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm so honored to be, even just for one evening, in the ranks of such extraordinary and inspiring women. And I know that the work that these organizations are doing are making a better future, not just for women in the church, but for the church and for our love for Christ. So thank you for that. To begin and give kind of context to my background in reading and chanting, I want to preface this by saying that my words are probably going to gravitate a bit more towards chanting. And that's not because chanting is any more interesting or important than reading in a liturgical capacity, but it's because I've found that my role as a chanter has drawn a lot more discussion and controversy in the church. And I think that's important to recognize. I got to chanting in kind of a circuitous way. I grew up doing lots and lots of music. I actually have a background in classical voice. I trained as an opera singer when I was in high school. And I had grown up hearing Byzantine chant in the church and loved it, but had such a small degree of knowledge about it. There was kind of, I felt like an iron curtain at that time in terms of learning about chant and what purpose it actually served in the history of our church and in the modern day, especially growing up Greek Orthodox and primarily hearing Western choir arrangements. And I always was interested in chant. I ultimately, when I was accepted into undergrad, decided I wanted to defer for a year and take a gap year. And I was fortunate enough to go do 2 semesters of faith at HCHC, the theological school in Brookline, and I studied chant while I was there. While I was there in my second semester of study, I ended up being tonsured, a reader and a chanter, by His Eminence Metropolitan Methodius. And that was a really incredible experience. And since then, I've been active in reading and chanting and trying to connect other people to all the possibilities of learning chant and just being more active readers in the church. In terms of my understanding of the ministry of reading and chanting and how this has evolved for me over the years and what it means to me, I, on a functional level, realized when I learned chant in a classroom setting and learned about the history of chant, particularly the way it was established in the Byzantine Empire, I found that chanters and readers really kind of are guides throughout the service. They guide the clergy and they guide the laity, and they set the tone, no pun intended, for the service. And they kind of bring everything together into a cohesive whole. And so it's a really kind of important, and I think sometimes overlooked, ministry that can determine a lot of our experience in the liturgy. I think also reading and chanting are 2 ways for lay people to get more involved in the more quotidian aspects of our services. I think sometimes there's a tendency amongst laity to devalue our contribution to services, and that's really wrong. I mean, a church, we matter to our clerics and our hierarchs as much as they matter to us, and they need us as much as we need them. And so we need to contribute in whatever way that we can. On a more symbolic level, I think, unfortunately, Axia and St. Phoebe's are working to change this. I think that there, unfortunately, we all know, is a dearth of hearing women in our church, both on a kind of basic level of in decision-making processes and on a more meta level. I guess we could say, of in our church. And I think one thing that makes our Orthodox Church so extraordinary and inimitable is the fact that our services and our liturgies are such strong sensory experiences. And it all ties back to our theology, of course, and music is a key part of that. And sound is a key sense in that experience. And so the fact of simply being able to hear women's voices in a service, I think, can create a really massive impact. I think if we're kind of removing ourselves from, if we look to the media, for example, in the United States, there are lots of conversations, I would say, about representation. And people say a lot of times it's really inspiring to watch a film and see somebody who looks like you. And I think the same can be said for the church. It's great to see somebody who looks like you and to hear somebody who sounds like you, because it reminds you that you too are capable and free to do those things and participate in that way, be whoever you want to be. So chanting and reading, they're functional in many, many ways. In terms of helping me understand the liturgy, and I think helping others understand the liturgy, I know I was raised Greek Orthodox, and I think that I had a sort of mild ignorance that I think it's easy to fall into for many people who are born and raised in the church when it came to the actual like meat of the services. And I was fortunate enough to speak Greek growing up, so I kind of understood what was going on, but learning to chant and becoming a more active reader required that I really dig deep and make an effort myself to understand what is being said. Why are we saying these things? Why are we hearing these things? And how does this thematically tie every part of the service together? So it's been an amazing learning experience. In every service, I learned something new. So it really has connected me to the liturgy a lot more than before. I felt like I was kind of a passive participant in the liturgy before I started taking reading and chanting seriously. And the other thing is, I think that, just as I said, readers and chanters set the tone and kind of guide the service. I think they also serve in a way as intermediaries between the laity and the clergy, and connect everybody who is in the church in a really important way. I know in other faith traditions, there is a really kind of aggressive practice of call and response, which I love. And I always, growing up, because we had a choir in my church, thought, oh, the Orthodox Church isn't like that. But it actually kind of is. When reading and chanting are taken into account, it is. And the readers and the chanters, I feel, in a way, are kind of liaisons for the laity to participate more actively in the service. And I think the other thing that is important is that one thing I learned years ago when I was on a real break trip with Orthodox Christian Fellowship that I had never known was that, at least in the Greek Orthodox Church, I'm sorry if it's different in other jurisdictions, but our altar screens, our iconostasia used to like stop at the hip so that the laity could see what was happening in the altar. And unfortunately, at least in the churches I've been to, the altar screens are no longer like that. So I feel that there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes between the people in the altar and the laity. And also, I need to note, the reason I say the people in the altar is because there are clergy in the altar, but there are also altar servers, and altar servers are not just boys. It's a misconception that only boys can be in the altar. But kind of tying this all together, why is this important? Why is this ministry important? I think that there has been like an epidemic of silence in our church when it comes to just being comfortable with women in these sorts of roles. I think a lot of people are still very uncomfortable with seeing women in active and in visual roles in the church. And there's nothing more in your face, I guess, than looking up at the altar and the altar screen, and then looking to the left and the right and seeing women at the chant stands. So I think, to close, I think it's important for everybody to know that they can be a reader and a chanter. You don't need a bunch of training, but make your presence known, and cultivate the resources that are now available. Thank you.
Unmute myself. I'd now like to call both Susan and Sophia to our forefront here. And to have, if folks have questions to address to them particularly, please raise your hand in the reactions button, and we'll call on you, and you can then speak to the issue in particular here of female readers and chanters. We did receive a question in advance, and I would like to actually start us off by addressing this question. And it was this: to speak to your parish's initial response to having a female tonsured reader or chanter or cantor in your parish. What kind of support or pushback did you receive from the laity? And did this fall along gender or age lines? And beyond support from your bishop or priest, how important is it to get the backing of your parish council? So I will pose that to our panelists, and they can take it from there.
I'm gonna not because Sophia is not more important, because she is, but this is going to be an age thing. So I'm just going to claim some seniority with my gray hair. So when we were tonsured, there were 4 of us, not one of whom had any training. I'm listening to Sophia is the kind of thing that just makes me yearn for the knowledge and the skill that you have and the talent. But there were 4 of us, and we were pretty much self-taught. And our priest wanted to do this really in response to the meeting from Rhodes. He wanted to encourage the parish to encourage all of us to be more involved. And so 2 men, 2 women, I will never forget, Metropolitan Philip and his deacon, and there was an archpriest, and there were 2 other priests. I mean, I kept thinking, like, I'm looking at this row of men, you know, and just thinking, well, nobody can say this didn't really happen. Like, nobody could really question the canonicity of this, because if there's one thing that was there, it was clerical authority. In the aftermath, I don't ever remember a time where, in a way, where it mattered. I mean, if I went to other events, other Orthodox women would say, well, I'm a chanter in our parish, nobody's ever tonsured me. And I'd say, well, maybe they should have. I mean, maybe people should notice the work that we do. In our parish, the chanters have always been treated very well and respected by the parish, but I don't know how many people actually know. I'm the only one of that original group who's still in the chanter stand. The 2 others have passed away, and the others not able to come often. So I don't think that it's often in the mind of the parish. In fact, I would say very often it's not. And over the many years since 1989, I don't know how many people actually know or remember this. They do know and remember, and I think the different priests we've had in those years have helped to the parish to appreciate the importance of the work the chanters do. I mean, in Sunday liturgy, we have a choir as well as the chanters, but matins, vespers, any weekday service, and most of Holy Week is done by the chanters with the priest. And I mean, it's a lot of work, and people appreciate that. But understanding it as a ministry which I think is so key here. And Sophia's articulated really beautifully the elements of that I think we need to help the church to appreciate. And Sophia, you, I'm sure, have comments here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Susan. I agree that we need to highlight the fact that this is a ministry. And it's not just like an extracurricular, and it can be if people want it to be, but it has the capacity to be a ministry. And I think that is the thing which often, or at least in my experience, has made people maybe a little uncomfortable, is that by taking an active role in the service in this way, you are participating in ministry, and you're being very active, and you're making your presence and your contribution known. In terms of kind of like the process, with my being tonsured, it was pretty direct. I was informed that my metropolitan wanted to tonsure me, and then it happened. I don't know if there was, I don't know what the lead up was like within my church. And I was sort of not in that scene anyway, because I was at Hellenic College, Holy Cross, taking chant classes, and I was going to church there on Sundays at the chapel and not at my home parish. But what I can speak to is that following being tonsured, at the theological school, there was one experience that I always remember and that stands out to me in particular. I'd been congratulated by a group of guy friends who were very talented chanters, very active chanters. They congratulated me. And then the following day, I found out from other people that these guys had been laughing that I had been tonsured a chanter, and that they had said, stick to the reading. Women should just stick to the reading. The chanting is really like for the men. And that was incredibly hurtful. And I share that not just to like share that experience, but because I think that even if on the surface, a lot of people are okay with this kind of participation, they are not necessarily ready to confront what it means and what ministry means for women in this role. And there are a lot of people who are, and there are a lot of people who welcome it. And I had tons of experiences where people said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And like, now I'm going to make more of an effort to be a more active reader, learn more chant, and get tonsured. But I think that we need to kind of like do work as a community to articulate what these kinds of acts of service mean, and to be taken, for these acts of service to be taken seriously, and especially as women, for our contribution and our role in the liturgy to be taken seriously.
Great. Thank you very much. We have a question from Rebecca. I'm going to spotlight you and you can ask your question.
Hi, thanks so much. This is a question for both of our speakers, but I wanted to pick up on something that Sophia said specifically. You mentioned that the altar servers don't necessarily have to be boys. And that, I mean, I think that's fairly striking to many of us. I'd love for you to elaborate on that. And I'd love for you to elaborate on perhaps how we can encourage or see more girls in the altar, see any girls in the altar.
So I want to thank you, first of all, for your question. I'd like to say first that I'm not a theologian by any means. So I don't feel equipped to like give you a bunch of data up front on this, but what I am confident in saying, and that I know from my studies during my year at the seminary, is that nowhere in our canons does it say that women cannot be in the altar. And I'm not sure what amalgamation of factors has led to that myth being put forward so aggressively. But it's not true. If our experts here with the theological background can provide like links and resources, I think that would be excellent, pointing to that information. But in terms of like getting more people into the altar and just like familiarizing ourselves with that, I think the first step is to talk to our peers in church and also to talk to our clerics. I think that a lot of clergymen are increasingly open to having women serve in the altar. And I've had really productive conversations with priests, deacons, and even hierarchs about this, who are wanting to bring women into the altar. And a lot of what I've heard is like, we need to do this in a slow and steady way because some people aren't ready for it. And that's not necessarily the philosophy that I support, but people are open to it and our leaders are open to it. So I think just talking about it and talking about the facts is the starting point. Susan, what do you think?
Well, actually, I'd like to interject here quickly because we are going to talk about altar service in just a few minutes. And so perhaps we can table this discussion till then. But I'd like to get one or two more questions in particular to the tonsured reader and chanter. Carrie Limbarakis, I'm going to spotlight you.
Thank you, Susan and Sophia. I'm very, very honored to be in your presence in a two-dimensional way. So I am curious, as I put in the chat, how your tonsuring came about. Was it initiated by the Metropolitan? Was it suggested to him? Did you request it? And so I know that the Antiochian Church is a little more progressive, if you will, than the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. So I'm happy to see that Susan was tonsured, but that Sophia also was tonsured subsequently. The last question in my chat was, has it occurred in either church since, to your knowledge? Has tonsuring of women occurred more frequently since the time that you both were tonsured? Thank you.
So I'm going to again claim my gray hairs here, Sophia. Thank you very much for that question. That's incredibly important question. In my case, the tonsuring of the four of us, 2 women and 2 men, happened because the priest at the time of our parish, Father Timothy Ferguson, reading about the consultation at Rhodes that took place in 1988, thought that the recommendations of that event, whatever it was, were important to follow up on for the health and well-being of the church. He thought they were good, positive steps the church could take to be more meaningful for many people. So it was our priest who brought this forward, and he didn't bring it forward just for the 2 women who were chanting. It was something, we did for the 4 of us, and that was very important too. 2 things are important about the aftermath. I was tonsured in 1989. I think Sophia is the first tonsured chanter that I have now met. I hear occasional rumors, but it's not like this became a practice of the Antiochians. It did not. In fact, I don't know. There was a rumor that there was another case. I don't know of other cases beyond our parish. So it clearly wasn't terribly important to other people at our archdiocese, if nothing. And I did not experience interest from the archdiocese or the diocese in terms of cultivating this as something that women could do, or even that, no one came and Sophia at least was trained. Nobody came and said, now that you're going to be chantered, how would you like some lessons? How would you like some tutor? I would have loved it, So that made me feel that something that I thought was incredibly important and just an honor immeasurable wasn't being valued by the people who ought to be valuing it. That is, the church should nourish our vocations.
Were you all from the same parish or from different parishes?
4 of us, we were in one parish. It was our little local church. So it was the work, our priest asked for this, and the Metropolitan came and did it. There was not a, this wasn't bigger than us. It was meaningful at the local level.
I want to thank Susan, and I also want to thank Sophia for your response. I want to just add that in the chat, I've received a message that the late Metropolitan Anthony of San Francisco tonsured about 10 women readers and chanters in his metropolis, and that several other Greek GOA bishops and metropolitans have tonsured individuals and women chanters as well. So this is something that is unevenly distributed for sure, but it's good to know that it happens in other places. And I want to thank both of you for your comments. I would like to move on to our second part of our presentation now. And hopefully those of you who have your hands up, that we'll be able to get back to you with your comments, or rather your questions, at the end of our presentation here today. So I'd like to share my screen once again and speak now about what we just talked about, the participation in the liturgy as altar servers. And in the seminar that I gave last year, I first talked about essentially what an altar server does, and these kind of a list of kind of duties of an altar server, and that there are in fact places where women and girls serve in the altar. Certainly, of course, women's monasteries, but also the Church of Antioch, and in Syria, in England, in Australia, in South America, all except the United States, has had girl altar servers for over 40 years. Here we see Metropolitan Georgios Cador with a young girl also serving with her male counterparts. In the Church of Russia, prior to the fall of communism, almost ubiquitously, it was women serving in the altars because they were essentially there. The Armenian Church, some Coptic churches, and the occasional church in the West. So it's not as if this doesn't happen. So I wanted to clarify that. And here are just pictures of the Church of Antioch, where we have both girls and boys in the various processions, usually vested, not always though. And certainly girls holding the subdiaconal fans, candles at the gospel, at the great entrance here. This is a young girl presenting the antitheron. And then if you notice, it's behind the iconostas to the priest at the time. And we have girls and boys lining up for the procession here. This is in the Armenian church. And in the Armenian church, they don't have an iconostas as in the Byzantine style. So you can clearly see that they are at the altar with their male counterparts. And this, again, on the right is from the Church of Antioch in South America. And on the left is the Coptic Orthodox Church. And then, of course, we have, well, why doesn't it happen here? And this is one part, or at least happen more frequently here. And this is my favorite grumpy cat meme regarding that in particular. In the webinar last year, which is available, a recording of which is available if you would desire, I actually outlined and basically discussed some of the quote unquote reasons why we don't, why that are given for not allowing girls to serve, and showed where they come up short. I think probably the strongest of these, that it's quote unquote not within the tradition of the church. And that is true. The older tradition of the church is that only the higher clergy, the bishop, priest, and deacon, are the servers in the altar. And the idea of young kids serving in the altar, frankly, is in the East in particular, is a very recent innovation in our church. I would say within the last 100 years. You do see some of that in the West, but not in the East. The most recent excuse that I've heard is that somehow we should not capitulate to societal norms. And I think that this is opens up a large topic of how we do enculturate ourselves in liturgy. We enculturate ourselves all the time, our music, our vestments. I mean, they're all part of Byzantine culture. But more precisely, even the participation of young boys in serving in the altar and in the West in particular actually grew out of the culture of the time from ancient Greek and in particular pagan worship. So it's not as if we don't appropriate things from our culture. The question is, what do we do it and how? We're called to transfigure culture. But I think most importantly, I then outlined reasons for inclusion. And this included the very important catechetical opportunities to learn about our liturgy, to actually look at the spiritual growth that is engendered by people who do participate, and the negative effect if they are not allowed just because they're in a woman's bodies, to speak to the integrity of the church in terms of the current practice of kind of dressing up young boys as subdeacons or readers, functions that they don't actually do. And we disobey a whole slew of canons in this regard, and the ethical formation of just allowing them to get a false sense of entitlement. So reasons for their inclusion, and also reasons for the assembly to actually see them in particular. So with that introduction, I would like to now segue into our first response. It is a video given by Ms. Elizabeth Bouteneff, who I'd like to introduce to you, about her kind of small service that she had done in the altar and how it was important for her. Elizabeth earned a degree in Russian and Eastern European studies. She served as a liturgical assistant at St. Vladimir's Seminary Chapel and the community in New York City, and sang in the choir at a parish in Yonkers, New York. She currently works as a teacher in Daejeon, South Korea, in the public school system there. So I will then share her video, and then we will move on to our next speaker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Bouteneff. I am currently in Daejeon, South Korea, working as an English teacher in an elementary school. I have the honor of being with you today in this slightly unusual format to talk about my experience as an altar assistant. So I served as an altar assistant when I was 13 years old, around that, at St. Gregory's in New York City. My key function was to cut the bread that was to be served for the endideron after communion. Of course, the priest cut the bread first for the communion, and then he passed it on to me, and I cut the rest of it. And this happened inside the altar. He would give me a blessing to enter the altar, and I would cut the bread in there, and then I would leave. So essentially, it was a very short and easy task, but one that took me some convincing to do. The reason why I changed my mind after some time is because my mother told me, this is probably the only time in your life you will ever step behind the altar. She told me it took a few weeks, and eventually I said yes. So once I switched my mindset from thinking about the social aspect to thinking about the spiritual aspect of this proposal, I thankfully changed my mind, and I served as an altar assistant. To be frank, all I did was cut some bread that was actually already partially cut, so it wasn't that difficult. I remember having the steps in my head lined up to a T, though, especially being, again, somebody who's sort of anxious. Like, I knew exactly at what point in the Our Father I should go around the outside of the church to enter the side door near the altar. And there I would receive his blessing. He just did a sign of the cross over my head, and I think spoke a few words, and I crossed the threshold into the altar. And I just cut the bread and I left. So I would say it's about 80% functional, that work, particularly for the actual community. It was just a very functional job. For me, in terms of symbolic importance, I think at that age, I didn't really fully understand the connection to bread per se, as is stated in the example question here. I think the biggest symbolic aspect for me was to participate in something that had otherwise been forbidden for me, or restricted. Even touching that bread I remember feeling very anxious to touch the bread because am I the right person to do this? It felt so important to me because I had never had access to it before. But I think having been raised in a church like St. Vladimir Seminary in Yonkers, New York, I knew that the altar is usually a more blocked off space, and most importantly, it was a place that non-ordained people can go, especially if you're a girl. Of course, altar boys and men can go in there even if they're not ordained, but I would never enter there. So it felt certainly very sacred as a space. And so when I got the opportunity to cross over that boundary, I remember feeling oh, I'm crossing over a threshold now. And I think that was the most symbolic thing for me, is just that feeling, and that feeling of being asked to do that. So the symbolism for me was not really necessarily about the actual bread as part of the service. It was me as a community member in that really tiny community. It took me out of being a passive bystander in the service. I know during the entire service, especially being a more anxious person, like I've mentioned, I would think about my role the entire service until I did it. And even afterwards, my heart would still be racing. So it certainly made it so I could not kind of just zone out during the service, because I had a job to do. And if I messed it up, that's even worse than doing it well and people still looking at me. So by all means, I did not want to mess up. And if I didn't do it, who would? It felt like I had to be there. I think the other most important part of that job is that I was asked to do it. I felt much more needed by my community, even though it's a small task, but the fact that someone asked me to, someone who kind of presumes themselves to be a little bit invisible, it felt really impactful to be noticed in this way, and to be and for someone to notice that maybe I had a use that could serve other people. I can compare it to my experience singing in the choir later on in life too, to how it's different. Singing in the choir is another wonderful way to serve in liturgy, but I think the main difference is that for me, singing in the choir was my choice to actively involve myself and to actively participate in the liturgy. It's much more of a choice for me to be more involved spiritually. I really want to get involved in this way. And if I'm not in the choir one day, it's okay. The liturgy can still go on. So it felt really different being asked to do something, to be given a job, and then to feel like I'm really serving in some way. That was really helpful. So it felt like I was doing it for my community, whereas singing in the choir, for me personally, and I know for other people it's different, for me personally, singing in the choir was a very personal choice that I made in order to feel more connected. I think first and foremost, like the fact that I was allowed in the altar when I was blessed by a priest is a pretty good sign that women can enter the altar and can be invited into that space. And I think second, just quickly, I think again that being asked to serve your community as a woman, even by entering the altar, is a way forward, and I think like very much so connected to the possibility for a future ordained female diaconate. I think they're absolutely connected. Hello everyone, my name is Elizabeth Bouteneff.
Wanted to thank Elizabeth for recording her comments for us. And she was sorry she wouldn't be here, but being that she's in Korea, the time difference is incredibly significant. But it shows that just small things can sometimes make a great deal of difference in someone's life. And this was a story that we wanted to highlight and uplift because of that. Our second speaker in this program is Dr. Hermina Nedelescu, and I would like to also sponsor her or showcase her as well. She is a neuroscientist in the Scripps Institute in San Diego. Dr. Nedelescu affirms that no branch of science alone can provide answers to everything. Therefore, she has embarked on a part-time theological studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Under the mentorship of professors at the Center for Theology and Natural Sciences and at the Patriarch Athenagoras Orthodox Institute, she is working to develop a theological anthropology that is rooted in the Orthodox Christian tradition and intricately connected with knowledge from modern neuroscience. So Hermina, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Regule. I'm going to share my screen now, so please bear with me. Can everyone see that?
Yes, go ahead, Hermina.
Okay, liturgical participation and why it matters. Hello, I'm delighted to be here with all of you today. The flow of my talk is as follows. First, I will share with you my personal experience participating in the liturgy as a child in the Orthodox Church where I grew up for some time in Romania. Then I will show you why the experience of being excluded from desired participation can hurt so much. And finally, I will talk about a liturgical service program in San Diego that is thriving, where both females and males participate together in Christ in the liturgical assembly. But first, let me give you a glimpse into how we sense and perceive various environmental stimuli within the context of the liturgy. The Orthodox liturgy is practiced within an environmental context that is concentrated with sensory information. We perceive this information through the physical senses, including sight, sound, touch, pain, smell, taste, and the sensation of bodily movements. For example, sugar falling from the consecrated wine, the Eucharist, falling on the tongue, is perceived as sweet, while the sounds from the hymns are deconstructed by our ear into simple and unique vibrations for subsequent analysis by the brain, often providing us a sense of auditory splendor in the church. Because we are both physical beings as well as spiritual beings, it is through our sensory systems of the brain that enable us to see and ultimately perceive spiritual experiences. It's interesting, isn't it, that St. Paul counsels for the cooperation of both spirit and mind in praying, singing, and other acts of worship. He says, I will pray with the spirit and I will pray with the mind also. I will sing praise to the spirit, but I will sing praise with the mind also. So what is this mind? The mind is the process of our physical brain, much like digestion is to the stomach. And without the physical brain, the process of the mind cannot exist, and our capacity to fully interpret experiences would be impossible. In the Orthodox Church, activation of all of our sensory systems of the brain takes place in a single liturgy. And our perception of the liturgy is ultimately influenced by these stimuli in the liturgical environment, as well as by the memories acquired through our experiences within the liturgical context. As a child, I felt these physical and spiritual experiences by participating firsthand in the liturgy and helping the priest at the altar with my brother. During our vacations from school in the city, we would go to my grandparents' house in the village not far from Bucharest, where my brother and I would participate in the liturgy. We would join the processions, which started in the altar and ended in the altar. We would also hold a candle during the gospel reading, or I would hand the censer to the priest when he asked for it. Thinking about this experience in retrospect, I now realize that my participation in the liturgy as a child not only taught me the flow of the liturgy and the different parts, but more importantly, the experience became instantiated in my physical being, and I became an integral part of the liturgy that has never left me. Back then, we did not have the possibility of taking many photos, but I found this photo online that is the closest to my own memory of how my brother and I participated as kids. We did not have any special robes. We just wore our best clothes. And you know, at this stage, I personally did not have a concept of not being allowed to enter the holy altar, because I was told that Saint Mary, the Mother of God, spent her time in the altar too, just like me when she was a little girl. So this is a church environment that I grew up in. However, everything changed when we moved to the United States. This is my brother Julian, where in the early 1990s, we relocated to California, and he continued to serve as an altar server, while I was told I was not allowed to participate in this way. I became bound to the pews. My brother and I were divided in the church. This was the first time in my life that I had experienced gender-based oppression based on my female body. I still attended church, but a distance grew between me and the liturgy. I was physically present, but often not spiritually there. I reasoned that if I was no longer allowed to experience God through my own ways, that is, through participation in the liturgical ceremony, then I was to turn to something better where I could experience and reveal God in my own ways, specifically through the physical matter that exists all around us. So I turned to the hard sciences as a young teenager and found consolation in the different science courses because for me, they reveal God's magnificent work. I became interested in the central nervous system and how experiences become instantiated in our brain's neurobiology, causing changes which we know as neuronal plasticity, and how these changes support adaptive or maladaptive behaviors. For example, what type of experience might motivate us to approach or avoid a specific environmental context? Put another way, why do some people approach the liturgy while others avoid it? Still fairly early in my studies as a graduate student at New York University, when I was learning how fear is instantiated in the brain, I was also attending a small parish in East Village, New York, called St. John the Baptist Greek Orthodox Church. Here, I met my godmother, and she was a critical role model for me at a point in my life where I was experiencing a tension between being a female scientist and a female Orthodox Christian. In the sciences, I was greatly supported and encouraged because I was a female, while in the church, I was often suppressed for the same reason, because I was a female. Angela, however, was an important role model for me in my mid to late 20s, and she helped me stay close to the liturgy. You see her here, helping a priest by holding a censer, and in these two photos as an integral part of the liturgy, where she now serves at the altar in a Greek Orthodox church in Brooklyn. I would like to conclude this first part of my talk by emphasizing two important points. One, the experience of serving in the liturgy as a child has shaped my thinking into understanding that I am an integral part of the liturgy, and I'm called to participate in my own way, not by watching, but by doing. Secondly, I would like to emphasize the importance of having other female role models in the church, such as my godmother. In the second part of my talk, I will share with you some insights from my field of neuroscience in terms of what happens if we were to look in the brain of people who are excluded or rejected from participating in something they want to be part of, but are denied. And I will demonstrate to you why this exclusion hurts so much. Feeling pain is the most primitive signal that tells us something is wrong. There's physical pain from actual damage to the body's tissue, but there's also emotional pain from being excluded, rejected, or alienated from something you'd like to be part of but are not allowed. And what's interesting is that many studies have demonstrated that both physical and emotional pain from being rejected or excluded share the same neural system. Today, I don't have time to go into the details of each of these studies, but I do want to emphasize the point that the same brain region becomes activated, much like an alarm system, by both physical pain and emotional pain, specifically emotional pain from exclusion. The frontal part of the brain, where motivation and goal-directed behaviors are processed, is precisely the area that becomes activated during exclusion pain, you see here in orange. And what is important to note is that this subregion, called the ventral prefrontal cortex, also gets activated when the hand of participants is placed in painfully hot water, causing pain to the skin of their hand. This increased activity here that you see in this brain region acts as an alarm system or conflict monitor to tell us that something is wrong, enabling the sensation of pain to be processed and interpreted, whether it is pain from physical damage or pain from being excluded from participation in something you like to be part of. This is why emotional pain from exclusion hurts so much. It's because both emotional pain, both types of pain, share the same neural systems. Now, these exclusion studies were done in the controlled laboratory settings, but what about in the context, what about exclusion of women, specifically in the context of the church congregations? That's exactly what this study did down here, where they showed that in congregations that included women to participate in their governing boards, such as parish councils for the Greek Orthodox churches, women reported a higher health score compared to congregations that excluded them from governing board. You can see here the scores higher. Similarly, congregations that included women in their religious ceremonies, such as leading mass or preaching the sermon, these women also showed higher score compared to congregations that excluded them from participation. Now, in terms of governing boards, many Orthodox churches have women participants on the board and thus would belong to this inclusive congregation group. However, in terms of religious participation in the liturgical ceremony with the clergy and altar servers delivering sermons, many Orthodox churches unfortunately belong in this group, in the non-inclusive congregation group, where women's health is often affected in a negative way. In the final part of my talk, I'd like to turn to the topic of girls and women participating in the liturgical service from more recent times. This is an example from a Serbian Orthodox church in Montenegro, where you see a female altar server in the holy altar with clergy and the bishop. You see her here leading the procession and here at the foot of the throne of the bishop. This is another female altar server in Australia in my friend's parish. Here are examples on the left of female servers from the Archdiocese in Athens on Pentecost, and on the right in a church in Crete from last Christmas. And these are photos from my own location here in San Diego of various liturgical celebrations where you can see both girls and young ladies participating in the liturgy together with male servers and the clergy. A mother wrote to me saying the following: "Hermina, all my daughter ever wanted was to be part of the service like her big brother. I feel there's so many questions over the years. Happy we are taking small but necessary steps towards change." Some people might call this change, which is fine, but we can also look at this as rediscovering of who we are as Orthodox Christians. And these are from another congregation in San Diego, where you see girls and boys processing together in the great entrance. They are not only enjoying participation because they feel they have an important role, but they also are learning the parts of the liturgy and becoming an integral part of the liturgy as the liturgical experience itself is becoming instantiated in their whole physical and spiritual being. The goal is to serve together in Christ. And although it takes a little bit of coordination at the beginning to integrate females in the liturgy, if they participate together Sunday after Sunday, they actually become very good very quickly. My friend, who's an altar server, suggested that once they are well acquainted with the liturgy, a mature altar server can function as a mentor, where he or she can direct and guide all the liturgical servers, because as you know, the entrances start and end in the altar. And with time, these liturgical servers who are called to this ministry will be able to learn additional tasks to help with within the sanctuary. Also, having a more mature altar server acting as a mentor would enable the clergy to focus specifically on the liturgy, and it would also relieve the Sunday school teachers who have other Sunday school duties. In the beginning phases, however, there is a bit of work and effort especially on the part of the clergy, who have to work together with the teachers and helpers to teach the youth where to walk, when to stop, which candles or icons to hold. The clergy in these cases also prepare the faithful by explaining and teaching to the congregation how in important places such as the great church of Hagia Sophia, processions involve the participation of both females and males. This program also provides a chance to teach in practice about the incarnation of Christ and how this important event in our salvation history sanctified all materiality, including our physical bodies, both males and females. If you initiate this program in your parish, it may look a little bit different than the photos I'm showing you here because every community is a bit different. But there is one important common goal of this program, and that is to apply a single consistent method for both females and males. And what I mean by that is that if boys who are serving and are not tonsured by the bishop and are able to enter the holy altar, so should the girls be able to. Because if we require a special prayer, which we know colloquially as tonsuring, by the bishop only for the female servers, but not the male servers, then we are stating that there's something wrong with the nature of the female body entering the sanctuary. And this is incompatible with our own theology of the incarnation of Christ, which sanctified all physical matter, including the female body. And we can be certain that females will perceive this message regarding their bodies with implications of turning on that alarm system or conflict monitor in the brain that processes and interprets pain. And this will in turn impact them in various ways, depending on the individual as they transition into adulthood. So in my last slide, I will just show you how does this experience-dependent impact on behavior happen. We have to turn to a little bit of brain development to gain some insights. The first thing to understand is that the brain changes significantly as the child transitions into adulthood, in particular at the level of the gray matter, which has to do with the density of neurons and their connectivity. You can see here that the gray matter decreases from the age of 5 to about 20. And the reason for that is because when we are born, we do not have that many connections in the brain. But around 6 months to 2 years, there's an explosion of connections being made in the brain. Brain cells are connecting with each other. And then subsequently, as these brain connections continue to be made, there are 2 critical phases of pruning of these connections. And this is when cognition increases and the child begins to make comparisons and to see conflicting messages between what is being preached and what is being practiced. And she starts to critically compare herself with her male peers. And if this conflict is not resolved, it will be carried on as the child transitions into adulthood. This is why it's so important to apply the same tactic to both males and females who have a call to serve. So now that we know this information, what are we going to do with it? Well, it depends. One might say, I'm going to stop assuming that girls and women are not allowed to participate in the full liturgical arena. And yes, that includes the holy altar. Or you might feel like saying, I'm going to slow down and think about the physical brain changes, psychological or spiritual wounding that may be caused when females are excluded from desired participation in the liturgy. Or you might like to take action. I'm going to start taking action by reading, learning more about this topic, sharing this information, or getting more involved in the life of the liturgy. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hermina. It's really wonderful way to bring this into focus and to show really that our liturgical, try to put into conversation both our liturgical practice and science, and to show in real data what happens when those who would like to participate are in fact excluded. I'm going to highlight you now, and I would like to open the floor for those who have questions in particular about this part of the program. And then hopefully we will be able to ask all of our panelists to come on and have general questions, Q&A for those moving forward. I know we are coming closer to our timeline. I think we'll probably go a little bit over. If those of you, if you have to leave, we can certainly understand. But for those of you who'd like to stay, we'll stay for a few more minutes till we can get in your questions, et cetera. If you have a question, please make sure that you are visible on the screen so then we can spotlight you and we can move forward. So the first question, I'm going to ask Andrew to, in fact, unmute, and I will add you to the spotlight and you can address your question.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Andy Nostel, and I go to one of the San Diego parishes that Dr. Nedelescu was so instrumental in starting our congregational server program. And my 9-year-old daughter serves, and I just want to say that it has been absolutely amazing to watch her develop over just the last few months. Her spiritual development, she has ADD, deals with anxiety. I see her taking her role so seriously. She knows the service, she follows along. So it's been just amazing. The other day, though, she asked me kind of in passing why she's not allowed to go in the altar. And I felt the blood just drain from my face because I didn't know exactly how to answer that. And thank God she answered the question herself. By noticing correctly that all the young boys and men up in the altar were all older than her, and that must be why she's not old enough yet. So I kind of changed the subject and moved on from there. So my first question is, when she asks me this again, do you have any suggestions for how I can respond to her, to a 9-year-old? And my second question is, what steps can I take as her dad to ask about the next steps, about possibly what pathways there might be to have our girls join the boys in the altar? If it's just a matter of asking the parish priest to consult with the bishop, and if the bishop bless it, to move forward, or just how we might move forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do want to mention that the St. Phoebe Center will be holding what we're calling a quote-unquote myth-busting seminar in July that will actually deal with altar access in particular as one of the many topics that we'll be speaking to. So we won't get to answer everything here now, but to realize that this will be something that we continue to talk about, and that if you'd like to know more, I encourage you to sign up for that seminar as well. So Hermina.
Yes, Dr. Andy Nostel, thank you for that question. I think we have to be honest, because your daughter at this age is entering adolescence, and this is a time, it used to be thought of a time as a phase of behavior problems. We actually look at this period with all respect. This is a time of innovation, creativity, and massive brain adaptability. And to tell them, and we have to be honest with them. There are probably a lot better theologians here in the audience who could maybe come up with some ideas to give you, but really for me, I think you have to perhaps speak with your priest, your parish council, and I mean, there's no reason why girls should not be allowed to enter the altar. So I think perhaps getting the conversation going at the parish level, our bishop, as you know, supports it. So I think just getting the conversation going and seeing how, when she's ready, she can learn the ways in the altar. And as I mentioned in my presentation, it's important to have an older mentor that could show her the ways.
Great. Thank you very much. Barbara, I'm going to spotlight you. You have a question and or experience you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'd like to share a little bit of my own experiences. I'm also cradle Orthodox, so I grew up in the church. My father is an Orthodox priest, a Russian Orthodox priest, and I often accompany him to baptisms, house blessings, funerals, visiting the sick or the dying since I was a little girl. So I would sing, chant, read, and then recently he has given me a blessing to hold the censer. Although there was one point where a young man came up at one point and just kind of grabbed it with the understanding that if there is a male present in the church, that he should be holding it. I didn't take it personally because I understand the mindset, but kind of going back to Hermina's presentation, I would hate to think that there was like a little girl like watching that and how discouraging that might have been. Also, God has been so gracious to us in that my daughter and I both got to hold the communion cloth together at my father's church. And she actually had her own experience as well, serving as an altar girl. She's a little shy, so I don't know. Do you want to share a little bit? Or? No, she's a little shy. It's okay, but that was also very meaningful for us because a lot of prayer went into it and intercessions. And I just kind of want to lastly pinpoint something, because there was something in the chat where, you know, I talked about modernism and how this is like a modern innovation. I know not the whole Orthodox Church believes this, but I hear very frequently, especially in the United States, that allowing girls to participate more is somehow an integration of, you know, evil Western values or, you know, the values of feminism. And my mother would always tell me that when she was little in Russia, she often saw women serving in the altar. My dad also told me that St. John Maximovitz of San Francisco had 2 female altar servers, and he was heavily criticized for it, and he did it anyway, and he's one of our greatest saints. You know, and so these things happen. St. Elizabeth of Moscow advocated highly for the female diaconate, but due to the incoming revolution, that was kind of put on the back burner, and the church became more concerned, rightfully so, with just surviving, you know. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think there is this misconception that if we see a young girl holding a candle, you know, at a gospel reading, that somehow if we view that as a manifestation of the evil that has infiltrated the church, I think that's a really big problem. And I'm so happy that we're like discussing this together. So I didn't have a question, I'm sorry, but I felt it was important to share. So thank you, Hermina, though, that was very insightful.
Well, thank you very much for your insights, and also just for sharing your own experience. Jennifer, let me ask you to unmute, and I will add you. You can address your question.
Yes, I do have a question, and just a reminder, I've been here before, but I'm coming from Catholicism, and some Catholic churches have female altar servers and some do not. I tended to be in those that did not. And whenever this, not just altar servers, but generally women's service, so both lecturing and chanting as well. Whenever this issue came up, there was an objection there that I did not see on the screen here, and I was surprised that it wasn't here. And the objection was that whenever women do begin to participate, they tend to take over. And not in the way that they push men out, that they try to say like, well, now it should only be women, but in the sense that when women begin to join, the males have a response. I don't know how else to put it except to say, like little boys who say like, well, if she's gonna play, then I don't wanna play. And they just leave. They stop doing it because now females are doing it. And even though that's juvenile and that's an issue with the males, I have seen it happen. And so have you heard anything in the Orthodox Church of that taking place, or has anyone raised that objection that if women join, then the men won't, and then the men won't have a place, etc.?
Great. Thank you for your question. Hermina, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, we're in the beginning phases of having girls integrated here in to the liturgy, and perhaps the clergy or others might know, but I have myself not heard any of that yet. I don't know if we will.
I think we can use readers in the church as one example. Certainly women have read, I mean, since the time I was a little girl, and it's not the case that men don't continue to read in the church. So while that is, and I think it's something to be aware of, I don't think it's borne out, at least not by our experience as of now. Mother Elizabeth has had her hand up. I'm going to ask her to unmute, and I will spotlight her as well to ask your question. Mother Elizabeth, you're on.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is a wonderful gathering. Thank you so much, Dr. Regule and Dr. Nedelescu, for what you've done. Dr. Regule, I knew your father, the lawyer, that Mother Alexandra, when I was a young woman, trying out my monastic life in Elwood City, and your dad would come and calm her down at times when she was all excited about building up something and they would run into some of these legal issues. Your dad was really there for her. And I'm so a little bit, I wish that I wasn't so hidden from people and I could have known your father when he came to Florida, because I'm in Florida.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for those comments. Do you have a question for Hermina?
Yes. I don't know to start with the negative or the positive, but I'm licensed as a nurse. I've experienced praying and singing with people that come out of comas, and the whole neurobiology is so very interesting because I had cancer wrapped around my vocal cords, and my first expression post surgery in 1991 was "Davos Kresne Bog," let God arise and let his enemies be scattered, is what came out of my mouth. And the pain issue, let's go to the negative first, because I think that's probably the least discussed of anything here. And I'm so happy to see you here as an expert, because I've been singing and reading in the church since I was in first grade. My daddy took me up to the choir and held me in his arms as a baby. So when I hear certain cherubic hymns, I feel my daddy's arms holding me. And
so would you like to speak to her, to speak about the pain issue in particular? Okay.
The pain issue is very difficult for me at the present moment, because I have less educated clergy living in my town who have written me a formal letter to exclude and shun me from the rental space of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia at the St. Nicholas rental space. And
okay, Hermina, can you speak to that particularly for our guests?
This pain caused me physical damage. And I'm still recovering from that, but I'm accepting it as a form of martyrdom and going forward with our Christmas monastery school, which I invite all of you. I'm very trained. I'm trained as a musician. I have my license and certification in music K-12. To find me on Zoom and set up, if you'd like to get involved with the music basics and beyond, to be able to feel that you're trained in this, we'd certainly like to offer you this opportunity and to go forward with our school, which now in Florida, the governor has made it available so that private schools as our Christmas monastery school can be funded. And
okay, wonderful. I have to cut you off right now. I'd like Hermina to address your question, and then so we can get some more questions in here.
Yes, I'm not sure what the question was exactly, but I do want to say that emotional pain is processed in our executive frontal brain by the same neural circuits that process physical pain to our body. And that's why it can be quite painful and quite damaging to us physically, psychologically, and spiritually. And over time, it sets up a neurobiology, an architecture in our brain that supports this maladaptive behavior. So sometimes the liturgy is great, but for some people, some of these stimuli, such as rejection or exclusion of females, can be very, very painful and distressing. And people end up avoiding or making a safety distance between themselves and the liturgy over time.
Thank you, Dr. Nedelescu. I wanted to bring all of our panelists back on the screen for you and ask if you have questions, just open it up to any and all questions that you might have from the presentations that we've had today. I do want to ask one thing that perhaps either any of you can address. There was a question or a statement in the chat that says that in the modern society where children are exposed to relatively fewer instances of sex-based discrimination than in previous generations, what kind of message do such discriminatory practices send to young people about the church when the church is potentially the first place that they experience or witness them? How does this affect their attitude towards the church and religion when such a disconnect exists with what they experience at school and environments outside the church? And he continues, I might suggest that this would be a disincentive for young females to be involved in church activities, which may develop into an overall feeling of disenfranchisement towards religion as a whole. Perhaps, Dr. Nedelescu, if you could just kind of speak to that, particularly, how does this sense of pain or this sense of disenfranchisement really affect not only their as I understand this question to be, their willingness and wanting to serve, but actually their experience of God or in the liturgy, because this is the place where we should, as Orthodox Christians, most salutarily experience the love of God and how that might affect that relationship.
Yeah, so the way it affects it is because spirituality is experienced within a tradition, such as our Orthodox tradition, and liturgy is key to us in experiencing that level of spirituality. But when there's pain, then there are changes in the brain that take place, and then the person starts protecting themselves by avoiding the noxious environment. And that is, in some cases, for some people, the liturgy. And a gulf begins to form between themselves and the liturgy. And so that affects people's spirituality because they're less likely to go there, and they'll go find it somewhere else, perhaps in a different tradition. They may turn to somewhere else, or it just might affect it overall, diminished.
Great. I would like to get in one more question here from.
Sorry, can I interject just one thing there? I think it's a really good question about how this affects our young people. And I'm speaking as a parent and also a participant in the church. And I think the church.
Can you first, Pat, can you raise your hand so I can.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Right here.
I'm going to add you to the spotlight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think the church needs to decide if it values our young girls. It's not the girls' responsibility to decide how they feel valued. It's the church's responsibility to figure out if it actually values girls as full human beings and women as full human beings. And, you know, if the church wants girls and women as part of the body of Christ, which we are and we should be, then it's really the church's corporate responsibility to figure it out. It's not the responsibility of our young girls to take that on themselves.
Good.
You know, it's yeah. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So I had a spotlight Talia, if you can ask your question. This will be the last question as we are significantly over time, but let's engage here. You need to speak louder. It was hard to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Not so much. Loudly is good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Talia from Philadelphia. So I wanted to ask you if maybe Dr. Hermina can answer this, if there are any tips or tricks on how to overcome just like the fear of shyness, you know, for example, not just within the church, but everything in my life. You know, I hold myself back from doing things because I was afraid to like be in front of people. You know, when I was a kid, my brothers did karate and kung fu, and my uncle was like, "You have to come. It'll be good for you." And I went to one class, got so shy, and I said, "I'll never do it." And now I'm like, why didn't I do it? I could have been good. So it's hard enough for a person like me who's shy to do things where you're already accepted as a girl, but now, you know, doing something where you're already like in an environment where the odds are against you. So how can a person like myself who's shy, maybe more reserved, break that barrier? You know, are there any tips, tricks, or like little steps I can do to overcome that fear and be maybe more confident, more comfortable in an uncomfortable setting?
Great. Thank you very much for that question. I would just like to point out that part of our video that Elizabeth shared was from a perspective of someone who was very shy and very tentative at first about her ministry, but as it became something that she experienced, it was something that she overcame and realized, I think, from her perspective, that it was an important thing to play, and she became much more comfortable. I think the younger, if I could interject here just for our panelists, I think the younger you start, the better. It's much harder sometimes as you get older to participate in things that you have yet to participate in. And it gets harder when you get older. That's what I would say. How about our other panelists? If you have would like to speak at all to the issue, unmute yourself and do so.
I think if I can say something, you just have to throw yourself in there. And one thing that, and I know that's obviously easier said than done, but one thing that I've heard from people over time, and I've kind of adopted it, is that people care about you a lot less than you think they do, in a positive way. Not they don't care for you, but they're not going to be like observing carefully what you're doing and criticizing your every move. So do what you want to do. Who cares what other people think? At the end of the day, like at the end of our lives, we're not going to be thinking about, oh my God, it was so embarrassing that one time when I like tripped a little walking up to the chant stand. So just, I would say, do what you want to do. Don't think about what other people think. And also safety in numbers. If you want to do something, say in the church that you're shy to do, if you want to ask your priest about serving, maybe like ask some of your friends or your fellow parishioners, hey, would you want to do this with me? And kind of enter in that way into things that feel uncomfortable. Because I know it can be like so scary. I get anxious too about that kind of stuff, but I think having people to stand with you in those new experiences can make it far less scary.
I will, if I could, this is Patricia Bouteneff. I'm going to speak from the perspective of Elizabeth, just talk a little bit about Elizabeth, because it was really, she had, like myself, when I was her age, had paralytic sort of social anxiety. She was understating it quite a bit, but it was really helpful to her in a lot of different situations in school and in church to be given a structured role. Unstructured roles are where it's really, really difficult. But if you give a child like that something, or even an adult, something with a very specific role, with very specific steps, that they know exactly what to do, and they can do it well and regularly and become comfortable in it, it makes all the difference in the world, honestly. So if there's a way for you to find that kind of experience or to design that kind of experience, even if it's a very small role in church, or if you can follow a small role that somebody else is doing, it's really, really helpful. So I'll leave it there.
I would just add, you can make those possibilities, as Pat was just saying. I know I wanted to share out in the choir. There are hymns like the communion hymn where you can have one person chanting a line and then the choir sings the refrain. And I've been trying to share that out. I mean, originally only the chanters who were the practice chanters were doing that role. And then I thought, what is, if it's one line, right? But we practice it in choir rehearsal, because if you've never done it before, even if you've heard it all your life and you can do it in your own head, people freeze up in front of the congregation. So we practice in the choir, and we encourage each other, and then people say, okay, I'm ready. And then I point to them, they chant in the liturgy, and it works. And by little steps, people can then do more. But I think by acknowledging that it's intimidating, and saying, let's practice it in rehearsal where there's only like 6 of us or 8 of us here, you acknowledge that being nervous is part of it, and that it actually is kind of a big deal, and then you can do it anyway, and everybody tells you how wonderful it is and how beautiful your voice is. Then you can move that forward. And I find that those people also are then more likely then to turn up during the evening services and help with the reading and the chanting in the evening services, or Holy Week. I mean, people can build on that, but we can help each other to have the practice space in which to get ready for that public presentation.
Well, I know we are incredibly over time. It's been an incredible conversation. I want to thank all our speakers, and I want to give you each your last 30 seconds of what you would like to say to our participants here before we give our closing prayer. So Dr. Hermina first.
For me, perhaps my last slide with the red, yellow, and green light, maybe you can think about it yourself personally, where you belong there. You might want to take action or read more about this information, just to get women and girls integrated in the liturgy and help rediscover our true Orthodox self.
Thank you. Dr. Susan.
I want to thank again St. Phoebe's and Oxia, because not only has it been wonderful to learn from the other women here, Sophia, Dr. Hermina, and Elizabeth, as well as Pat and you, Teva, but it's incredibly important to hear and know more experiences than those of our own parishes or those of our own lives. And it just back to the question of who's been tonsured and when, I would hear reports of women being tonsured, but I didn't have a way to meet those women. And it's in this kind of space that we can bring together kind of examples that Dr. Hermina is talking about, to see that in action as something that you can bring back to your parish, the kind of training and singing that Sophia has had. It helps us to know about each other. It makes us stronger, it makes us a better church, but it's just deeply nourishing to have a community, feel this community. Thank you, all of you.
Wonderful. Sophia.
2 things. Number 1, echoing, I think it was Patricia who said this, forgive me if it was somebody else, but remember that if you're a woman, remember you are a whole person. And so remember to demand to be treated as such. And never forget that you have rights and you deserve to be treated like a person. And if you're a man, respect women in that way and be an ally in the community. And number 2, arm yourself with knowledge. And you can do that by, it's like a plug for the myth busting session. But yeah, arm yourself with knowledge, because a lot of the things that we hear about women in our church are based on half truths or complete lies and untruths. So learn what you need to know, and that I think will improve your experience and open up your mind and create more opportunities.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of our speakers, as well as all of you, for this wonderful session. We did have some technical difficulties. We weren't able to go above the 100-person threshold. We had many, many more people who actually had signed up for this seminar. We will be, in fact, we have recorded the session, and that will be available. And we will send out a notice to everyone on the list. We want to apologize for that. I'd now like to call upon the chair of St. Phoebe to give our closing prayer. Let me just remove all the spotlights.
Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. Just a wonderful evening. Wonderful to be together. Very inspiring. I always feel lifted up in the company of all of you. Lord Jesus Christ, our God, please grant us the inspiration and the will and the discernment to do your work in the lives of women and men in the Orthodox Church today and for the future. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all again. For those of you in the St. Phoebe Center, please stay on the line. And everyone else, we wish you a good evening. And thank you for joining us.